Welcome everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with the Rational Independent, and we just can't seem to get away from Trump. The media just can't quit him. He leads to rating, he leads to clicks, and so he must be the center and the star of the show. Also, they kind of hate him. I guess this is maybe a frenemies thing? Yeah, it's called a frenemies thing. I know we've been talking a lot about it recently, but this is where Reddit is stuck. So we got to keep talking about it a little bit. From The Independent, headline, Trump probe subpoenaed CCTV from Georgia 2020 ballot counting center. So for those of you who have lives, President Trump made some calls and some claims and talked to the Georgia Secretary of State, Rathsberger, I forget his name. Anyway, and basically said something like, find me more votes, or there's got to be more votes, or it's a close election, surely we can find more votes, whatever. Accounts vary. I think there might be a recording, maybe not. I've never heard one. But basically, from that statement, we can extrapolate President Trump, terrible, evil, no good, very bad, trying to steal the virtuous and ever presumptively wonderful election of President Joe Biden, who got more votes than Barack Obama did, whatever. Surely he lost, and surely, therefore, he's trying to steal the election, and so we must get him in trouble for stealing the election. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. President Trump has had indictments come down and charges filed for him in one state jurisdiction, I want to say New York, and one federal jurisdiction, a district court in Florida. And it looks like for a while now, the Attorney General in Georgia has been reviewing whether or not he should bring charges against President Trump for his actions relating to the 2020 election. After all, claims and actions and statements are all things that could, in theory, violate the laws. So they're looking to see whether or not they want to file charges. I don't know why it takes 2.5 years to figure that out, but, maybe they just work slowly. So we have the Georgia Attorney General debating and investigating and deciding this. However, this is what's interesting, the Department of Justice also has a grand jury. And this is the one, by the way, it's run by Sam Smith, a special prosecutor, and sent a letter to Donald Trump over the weekend that we talked about in an earlier video, claiming that they were preparing to file charges against him, that they wanted him to come and be a witness for the grand jury, and they're going after him in relation again to the 2020 election. And what this article basically covers is that the federal probe run by the DOJ special prosecutor is now subpoenaing surveillance records from the Georgia election authorities. So there's a couple of implications to that. Maybe they think that Georgia's never really going to pull the trigger. Maybe they think they'd rather prosecute this in a federal jurisdiction. There's a few kind of thorny legal issues here. But that's the crux of the article, is that there was a grand jury subpoena from to the Georgia Secretary of State's office seeking security video around the State Farm Arena, which is, I guess, where they did some ballots and they did some counting, et cetera, et cetera. That's what it was. This is the federal probe relating to the January 6th riots, kerfuffle, insurrection, pick your descriptor. And so now they're chasing after Georgia election security footage. Seems a little odd, but short article. Here's their closing paragraph. I'll give them the last word. Both the state and the federal probes are expected to result in indictments against the ex-president, who's currently facing criminal charges in his former home state of New York, as well as a separate federal indictment for allegedly unlawfully retaining national defense information in defiance of a grand jury subpoena. The interesting thing is, because I was trying to look for an interesting angle, because the article's kind of a nothing burger, but it's getting traction on Reddit, so I wanted to see why, and I took a look at some of the comments, and it seems like the lefties on Reddit basically say, it's not a witch hunt if you find a witch. It's not a snipe hunt if you find a snipe. The criminal justice system is biased against criminals, so if they're coming after you, you're a criminal, more or less. In other words, it's an exercise in a particular logical fallacy we might call a confirmation bias. In other words, when you read information, news articles, analysis, etc., that confirms what you already believe, you are biased to believe that information because it's reinforcing the way that you see the world. And a world that is uncertain is a world that's dangerous. And so each of us has a psychological need to understand the world that's going on around us. So we build a worldview that says, I've been watching some old House episodes, and one of his things is everybody lies. And that's part of his worldview. He's had some rough experiences that have led him to believe that, and he himself is a liar. So he imputes that onto other people as well. And his foundational worldview is everybody lies. That is comforting to him and useful and allows him to be a successful character in the show, operating from that frame of reference, unless he met someone who didn't lie. Because if he ran into evidence that this core worldview was false, that his reasoning was faulty, then he would have to, his worldview would be shattered, and he would have to reevaluate the way the world works. That's very expensive and very dangerous, and it's something that the human mind does not do easily. So instead, he looks for information that confirms his bias that everybody lies. The same is what I see on Reddit. Anything that trashes Trump gets pretty good traction on Reddit because it confirms the bias that's there. It allows people to reinforce what they've already decided, that Trump is a criminal and that he deserves to go to prison, not be reelected. That's where a big chunk of the left is. They've made that decision. The jury's not out anymore. We're not talking deliberation. They don't really care to look at fresh facts. They've decided he's a criminal. And so when they hear something that confirms that, they absorb that information uncritically. They assume that it's true. They're biased to believe that it's true because it supports and confirms their own worldview. This isn't just on the left. This is a human nature thing. It happens all the time. You can see this in your own life, even outside of a political circumstance. So where does that leave us? If we want to be critical thinkers, if we want to look at the world and actually analyze the information that comes in, then just because something comes in that confirms what we already believe, it doesn't mean we can just absorb that uncritically. It means that we have to process it and analyze it and pressure test it and make sure that it is right, that it is good, that it is valid, that this piece of information stands with the other pieces of information that we use to form our opinions and beliefs. It is more expensive to operate that way, mentally and emotionally. It makes it harder for you to join with the crowd. It leads to a lonelier existence, at least politically. But it leads to a more sure foundation. I am a man of faith. I believe, frankly, that Jesus is the Christ. I'm a Christian. It's probably not a big surprise to people who pay any kind of attention to me. That's my worldview. That is a worldview that I was partially taught by my parents, but was further reinforced through my own study, my own experience. It's one of the, if not the only explanation that I can find that allows all the pieces of information that I have to line up and to stand together in one cohesive piece. For some reason, that's the way that I'm wired. I need things to line up. I need things to stick together. Not everybody feels that way. Not everyone thinks that way. And that's where I think I'm seeing a little bit come into focus for this channel. And the focus is pretty simple. You have to ask yourself the question, are you a citizen or are you a subject? Because a citizen is someone who relies on their government for less. Less protection, less rules, less governance, less taxes, less control, and demands from their government more personal autonomy, more freedom to choose, more freedom to fail. A citizen is someone who accepts in the great social compromise the balance of power between state and personal, between public and private. A citizen is someone who accepts that they must be responsible for more of seeking for their own and their own family's welfare. And in return, they expect the autonomy to go and pursue that. A subject voluntarily surrenders chunks of their autonomy in exchange for being taken care of. Part of that autonomy means you lose some rights. It means you're protected from some dangers, but it means that you rely on the government to provide that protection. And we're in a bit of a schizophrenic society right now because one chunk of the voting populace, one chunk of the electorate, let me back that up. We're in a mess right now politically, at least partially because language has become corrupted. And so words don't mean the same thing from one party to the other, from one person to another, from one background to another. And if you've corrupted the meaning of words, then you've lost the ability to have a useful dialogue. So you end up with a situation where the left talks about rights and the right talks about rights, but they don't mean the same thing. And that creates a lot of confusion. That creates a lot of angst and antagonism, even sometimes leading to violence. There's room in the world for people who make the bargain and say, I will give the government more control over my life, make me a subject. That's the deal that kings made with their people. That's the deal that authoritarian governments make for their people. That's not the American deal. America is not built that way. And if you build a population of subjects, then you have to create a ruling class to rule those subjects, because subjects must be ruled. They cannot stand on their own, autonomous and individual. That is not in their nature. So each of us has a choice. Are we a citizen or are we a subject? If we're a citizen, then we have to push back on government programs and even individuals that purport to be trying to help us, but in reality are attuned to the life of a subject. This goes for things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. A lot of the transfer payments, I won't even call them welfare, a lot of the top-down government redistribution of wealth stems from an idea that the government must care for its subjects. And a lot of people who stand against those things are people who would rather stand on their own. One caveat here. I've mentioned I'm a man of faith. I've mentioned that I fall on the side of being a citizen, that I stand against the idea of being subject. One of the reasons for that is not because I believe in some Darwinian struggle. This is where some of the red pill movement gets off base. It is not a Darwinian struggle that we're trying to create. It's not a libertarian struggle that we're trying to create. It's not antisocial to be an independent citizen. It's actually pro-social, pro-voluntary social engagement, but we'll talk about that later. I can believe that I need to be an independent citizen and also believe that there's going to be times in my life where I need my church to support me, where I need my family to support me, where I need to reach out to friends, to loved ones, to business associates, and in the last exigent extreme, maybe even government welfare. Because I am not perfect, because I'm flawed like everybody else. Each of us has strengths and weaknesses. Each of us has things that are easy and things that are a challenge. Just because I desire to be an independent citizen doesn't mean that I believe in survival of the fittest, that it's a dog-eat-dog world. What it means is that I believe first and foremost that society functions best when social interactions are voluntary. That's why the free market is such a beautiful thing, because it requires voluntary exchange of goods and services. It's not compulsory. The only way that the market becomes compulsory is when the government gets involved. Governments function through force. And I don't think it's right, morally or practically, for society to be built on interactions that require government force in order to happen. The market is not the only example of a voluntary exchange of goods and services. I'll be somewhat transparent. My wife and I are in a bit of a financial pickle right now. And even though I was debt-free for a long time, we ended up getting ourselves a little out over our skis based on some personal choices. And I ended up needing to reach out to one family member and to one close friend and borrow some money, a considerable amount of money. That's not a very comfortable thing. I prefer to be independent. I prefer to live my own life. But guess what? We all make mistakes. I'm grateful for the support of my friends and loved ones, and I will pay them back. That is something that a citizen agrees. They hold to their word. And even if they are in need, they want to stand on their own feet. They seek to make whole anywhere where they have created a demand voluntarily. I didn't extract this money from these people. I didn't ask the government to do it on my behalf. It was a voluntary exchange, and I was grateful for it. I'll be just as grateful when I get a chance to pay them back. What I'm trying to say is, if you want to be a subject, then you have to reshape the entire American governmental system, because it's not built for subjects. If you want to be a citizen, you need to recognize that that is your enemy, not the left, not the right, not the Republicans, not the Democrats. The challenge as a citizen that you face is that there are people, growing hordes of people in America who want to overthrow a government built by and for the people and replace it with something fit for subjects, not citizens. That's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.